My heart shattered not when they lowered his casket into the earth, but when I saw the empty, calculating eyes of the men who stood beside me, feigning grief. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am 65 years old. The story I am about to tell you is the most devastating and profound one of my life. A tale of love, betrayal, and the shocking discovery that the most evil people can be the ones you gave birth to. My husband, Arthur, was a man woven from starlight and sawdust. He was a master woodcarver, and in our small, quiet town of Harmony Creek, his hands were legendary. He didn't crave wealth or fame. He found his joy in the scent of cedar and the elegant curve of a wooden bird's wing. Our world was simple, built on a foundation of deep, abiding affection and the gentle hum of his workshop. We raised our 2 sons, Julian and Marcus, in this world, believing that a rich life was one filled with purpose, not possessions. But the boys had different dreams. From an early age, Julian the elder was drawn to the distant shimmer of the city. He devoured books on finance and technology, his mind a steel trap for numbers and business jargon. Marcus, ever the follower, shadowed his brother, echoing his ambitions with a less focused but equally fervent desire for something more than what our quiet life offered. We were proud of them, of course. We worked hard, saving every penny from Arthur's modest sales and my sewing to put them through college. We believed we were giving them a chance at a better life, a life they had chosen for themselves. And for a while, it seemed true. Julian landed a high-powered job at a tech firm in the city, and Marcus quickly followed, finding work in the same industry. They called often at first, full of stories about their new lives and the money they were making. But a subtle shift began to happen. The calls grew shorter, less frequent. When they did visit, they arrived in expensive, sleek cars, dressed in suits that felt foreign to our rustic home. They spoke of things we couldn't understand: stock portfolios, investment strategies, and corporate ladders. Their conversations became a barrier, a wall between us. They would glance at Arthur's calloused hands and my worn-out apron with a peculiar mixture of pity and shame. One crisp autumn day, while sitting on our porch swing, Julian gestured vaguely at our home. "Mom, Dad, you really should consider selling this place. It's a bit outdated. You deserve something better." My heart seized. Outdated? This house, with its tin roof and creaking floorboards, was a living testament to our love. It was where we had brought our babies home, where we had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical. I couldn't imagine a place better than this. It was our sanctuary, our history. Arthur, with his quiet wisdom, would sense my distress. "Eleanor," he'd say, his voice soft as a whisper, "they have forgotten what it means to be home. Money has changed them." I fought against his words, clinging to the memory of the loving boys who would run into his workshop, their faces smeared with sawdust, begging to help. "They're just busy," I'd tell myself. "They're building their lives. They'll come back to us someday." But in my heart, a cold, painful truth was beginning to form. We had lost our sons long before I lost my husband. We had become a memory of a past they wanted to erase. The pressure mounted relentlessly. The visits, once a source of quiet anticipation, became a tense exercise in evasion. Julian and Marcus would bring up the retirement community again and again, painting a glossy picture of manicured lawns and daily activities. They insisted we would be safer and happier there. I saw the hidden meaning behind their words. They wanted to pack us away, to make us a problem to be solved, a relic to be moved out of sight. The final, most direct push came when Julian arrived with legal documents. He'd had our property appraised without our knowledge. "Mom, Dad," he said, his smile perfectly practiced, "this house is barely worth a thing. Maybe $1,000 tops. But if you sell it, I can add some money to help you move somewhere better." Better? My mind screamed. There was no better place than this home. For him, everything was a transaction, a number on a spreadsheet. "And Dad, you should retire from that workshop. You're 70 now. It's time to rest," Julian continued, the words sounding caring but laced with an unsettling impatience. Arthur looked at him, his sadness so profound it was a physical weight in the air. "Son, my work is not a burden. It's what keeps me alive. It gives my days meaning. But the boys didn't understand. Their world was one of numbers and progress, not of purpose and passion. They couldn't grasp that Arthur's work was his very soul. In the months that followed, the tension was a constant, suffocating presence. My sons arranged for real estate agents to come without permission, and they talked about an early inheritance. I was speechless. They were asking for our inheritance while we were still alive, still vibrant. It was an audacity I couldn't comprehend. That night, Arthur and I lay in bed, talking until dawn. He told me he was afraid. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice thin with worry. "This isn't just ambition. There's something darker here. I have a feeling—" He didn't finish his sentence, but a chill ran through me. I couldn't have imagined how profoundly right he was. I didn't know that my own sons were planning something that would change my life forever. I was utterly blind to the conspiracy unfolding right under my nose. And the truth would be a poison more potent than any they could ever use. 3 weeks before Arthur's death, Julian came to see me alone. He looked unusually solemn, his polished composure slightly frayed around the edges. We sat at our old kitchen table, the one where he and his brother had eaten countless breakfasts. "Mom," he said, his voice low and serious, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, Marcus and I will always take care of you." His words at the time were a balm to my anxious heart. They felt like a promise, a reassurance that the love of my sons was still there, buried beneath a layer of ambition. But now, as I replay those words in my mind, they sound like a prophecy, a warning from a place I never wanted to visit. What did he mean, no matter what happens? What did he know that I didn't? The day everything changed was a Tuesday. Arthur had left for his workshop early, a ritual he'd followed for over 40 years. I was in the kitchen, preparing his favorite lunch, roast chicken with rosemary and a side of mashed potatoes, when the phone rang with a shrillness that made my blood run cold. It was a voice I didn't know, a cold official tone. "Mrs. Vance? I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The words dissolved into a dizzying rush. The world stopped. My legs turned to jelly, and I had to grab the counter to keep from falling. My dear neighbor, Beatrice, a woman with a heart as big as her laughter, saw the panic on my face and had to drive me because my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold the keys. The trip to the hospital was a blur. My mind refused to process the words. Serious accident. Arthur was meticulous, a craftsman who lived for precision and detail. How could this have happened? When we arrived, my sons were already there. That surprised me. No one had called them. Not me, anyway. But in my desperation, I didn't question it. It felt like a small miracle. A sign that we were a family again, in the face of tragedy. "Mom," Julian said, hugging me with a force that seemed genuine. "Dad is in bad shape. The doctors said a machine at the workshop exploded. He has severe burns and a traumatic brain injury." Marcus's eyes were red, but something in his expression felt off. He seemed more nervous than sad, like a man waiting for a verdict rather than grieving for his father. My heart was in my throat, a physical weight. "Can we see him?" I pleaded. A nurse explained the rules. Only immediate family, one at a time, for 5 minutes. When I walked into that ICU room, my soul sank. Arthur was unrecognizable, a silhouette of a man hooked up to a dozen machines. Bandages covered most of his face and arms. The gentle humming of the machines was a macabre soundtrack to my nightmare. I walked up to his bed and took his hand, the only part of his body that seemed whole. "Arthur, my love, I'm here. Everything is going to be all right." For a moment, I felt a faint squeeze. His eyes moved behind his closed lids. He was fighting. My warrior, my artist, was fighting to get back to me. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I practically lived in the waiting room, catching moments of sleep in an uncomfortable chair. Julian and Marcus took turns accompanying me, but they always seemed more interested in talking to the doctors than in comforting their father. I overheard fragments of conversations, pieces that I couldn't put together in my grief-addled mind. Marcus asked about medical insurance, about the cost of treatment. Julian was on his phone talking about life insurance policies and beneficiaries. "Mom," Julian said to me on the second day, "we reviewed Dad's insurance. He has a life insurance policy for $75,000. There's also a workers' compensation policy that could cover up to $100,000 more." Why was he talking about money when Arthur was still clinging to life? Why was he so concerned with insurance when his father was dying? "I don't care about the money," I said, my voice sharp with a grief-fueled anger. "I just want your father to get better." Julian offered a polite but empty smile. "Of course, Mom," he said. But I saw something in his eyes that I didn't like. A coldness, a calculating gleam as his father lay dying. On the third day, the doctors gave us the most devastating news. "Mrs. Vance," Dr. Patterson said softly, "we have to be realistic about his chances. The head trauma is more severe than we initially thought. We could keep him alive indefinitely, but it's highly unlikely he will ever regain consciousness." My world shattered. 42 years of marriage, a lifetime of love, all fading away. I wanted to fight. I wanted to try everything. But Julian and Marcus exchanged a look that made my stomach churn. "Mom," Julian said, "we have to be practical." Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden. A burden. The word was a slap across the face. "He's your father!" I screamed, a raw fury I didn't know I possessed boiling to the surface. "He's the man who raised you, who worked his entire life to give you everything he could." "We know, Mom," Marcus chimed in, "but we also have to think about you. The medical bills are going to be enormous. Again, money. Always money. My husband was dying, and they were calculating the costs. That night, alone with Arthur in his room, I took his hand and spoke to him. "My love, I can't let you go. I can't imagine my life without you." And then his fingers moved, squeezing mine with a force that was almost imperceptible. His lips moved as if he were trying to say something. I called for the nurses, desperate. "He's reacting. He's trying to talk!" But by the time they arrived, he had returned to his previous state. The nurse checked the monitors and shook her head. "Sometimes there are involuntary muscle spasms, ma'am. It doesn't mean he's conscious." But I knew. I knew my Arthur had tried to communicate with me. He had fought to tell me something, and he couldn't. And I had a feeling the secret he was trying to tell me was a very dark one indeed. 2 days later, in the early hours of Friday morning, the machines began to wail. A deafening series of beeps and flashing lights. Nurses rushed into Arthur's room as I jolted awake from a light doze in the hallway. "No, no, no!" I screamed, running towards the door. The doctors worked for what seemed like an eternity, but it was no use. At 4:37 a.m., my Arthur was officially declared dead. The pain was physical, a tearing in my chest. I collapsed beside his bed, hugging his body, still warm, refusing to believe he was gone forever. Julian and Marcus arrived an hour later, looking oddly prepared, as if they had been waiting for the call. They brought papers, documents, and phone numbers for funeral homes. "We've already spoken with the Harmony Creek Funeral Home," Julian said, his voice flat and efficient as I sobbed uncontrollably. "They can pick up the body this morning." "We've also contacted the insurance," Marcus added. "The claim process is already underway." I was aghast. How could they be so efficient, so organized, so cold, just an hour after losing their father? Something was profoundly wrong. But my grief was a heavy blanket, suffocating my ability to think clearly. The funeral was scheduled for the following Monday. Julian took care of all the arrangements without truly consulting me. He chose the simplest casket, the shortest service, as if he wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible. "It's what Dad would have wanted," he said when I complained. Something simple without a fuss. But that was a lie. Arthur was a man who loved his community, his friends. He deserved a proper goodbye, not this indecent rush to bury him and forget. The day of the funeral was as somber as my heart, cloudy and cold. I wore my one black dress, the same one I had worn to my own mother's funeral years ago. My hands were shaking so much that Beatrice had to help me with the tiny buttons on the back. "Be strong, Eleanor," my dear friend whispered as she gently brushed my hair. "Arthur would want to see you strong." But I wasn't strong. I felt hollow, like a shell without a soul. 42 years of marriage could not be buried so easily. Every object in the house now felt like a ghost, a haunting reminder of the man who was no longer there. His coffee mug on the table, his well-worn tools in the workshop, his pillow that still held his scent. When we arrived at the cemetery, I was struck by how few people were there. I had expected to see Arthur's old carving students, his fellow artisans, more neighbors and friends. But it was just Julian, Marcus, Julian's wife, Serena, Beatrice, me, and the pastor. For a man who had lived 70 years in the same town and had touched so many lives, the funeral was strangely empty. "Where are the men from the workshop?" I asked Julian, my voice barely a whisper. "We didn't want to bother anyone," he replied quickly. Dad was a private person. He would have preferred something intimate. Another lie. Arthur was the opposite of private. He loved to share his work, to talk to anyone who would listen. He would have wanted his community to come and say goodbye. Why had Julian decided to make everything so secretive, so rushed? During the service, I watched my sons with a strange, detached curiosity. Julian had a solemn expression, but his eyes kept darting toward his watch. Marcus seemed restless, as if he had more important things to do. Serena discreetly checked her phone behind her dark veil. This was how they were saying goodbye to their father, with impatience and a lack of true emotion. The pastor's words about eternal life and rest felt hollow in my shattered heart. I didn't want Arthur to rest in peace. I wanted him to come home with me. When it was time to throw dirt onto the casket, my legs gave way. Beatrice had to support me as I sobbed uncontrollably. The sound of the soil hitting the wood was final, conclusive, hopeless. It was at that exact moment, standing by my husband's grave, that my phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." My heart stopped. The letters danced in front of my eyes as if I were hallucinating. I must be losing my mind from the grief. With trembling hands, I replied, "Who are you?" The answer came instantly. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The phone fell from my hands as if it were burning. Beatrice bent down to pick it up, but I stopped her abruptly. I couldn't let anyone else see those messages. Not until I understood what was happening. "Are you okay, Mom?" Julian asked, approaching with a worried expression. I stared at him, trying to find some clue on his face. His eyes seemed sincere, but now every gesture, every word, every expression felt suspicious. "I'm fine," I lied, slipping the phone into my purse. "I just need to go home." The drive home was a fog of unreality. Was this a cruel prank? A twisted joke at the worst moment of my life? Or was there a real possibility that Arthur was alive? But if he was, who had we buried? And if he wasn't, who knew enough details about our lives to write something so specific and incriminating about our sons? The messages had to come from someone close, someone with intimate knowledge of our family. That night, alone in my house, which now felt like a tomb, I began to review every detail of the last few days. Arthur's accident had been strange from the start. According to Julian, a machine had exploded in the workshop. But Arthur knew every screw and wire in that place. He was meticulous about maintenance, obsessive about safety. Plus, how had my sons gotten to the hospital so quickly if no one had notified them? The hospital had called me first. I was his emergency contact. How did they know about the accident before I did? And then there was the money. From day one, Julian and Marcus had talked about insurance policies and beneficiaries as if they had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it. It was all too efficient, too cold. The next morning, driven by a new, chilling purpose, I decided to check Arthur's papers. He kept all his important documents in an old metal box in his desk in the den. Insurance policies, the deed to the house, workshop documents. Everything was there. I found the $75,000 life insurance policy Julian had mentioned, but something felt wrong. The policy had been updated just 6 months earlier, increasing the coverage from a modest $5,000 to a shocking $75,000. Why had Arthur done this? He had never mentioned the change to me. More importantly, Who had suggested he do it? My heart pounded in my chest as I kept looking. I found something even more disturbing. A workers' compensation policy that I didn't know about, purchased just 2 months before his death. An additional $100,000 in case of accidental death on the job, a staggering amount for a man like Arthur. It was a fortune big enough to be tempting, a lure for someone without a conscience. My phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. This time I didn't hesitate. This person, whoever they were, knew too much to be a prankster. They knew about the insurance policies. They knew about my sons. They knew details that only someone very close to us could know. The next day, I went to the bank where Arthur and I had kept our account for 30 years. Mrs. Henderson, the manager who had known us forever, greeted me with sincere condolences. Eleanor, I am so sorry about Arthur. He was a good man. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson, I replied, my voice trembling. I came to check our accounts. I need to understand our financial situation. She showed me the bank statements from the last 6 months. What I saw froze me. Over the past 3 months, large, unexplained withdrawals had been made from our savings account. $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, $4,000 in March. Money that I didn't know had been moved. Who authorized these withdrawals? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Your husband came in person, Mrs. Henderson explained. He said he needed the money for repairs at the workshop. But I kept the household accounts. I knew exactly how much money we had and what we spent it on. Arthur had never mentioned expensive repairs at the workshop, and we definitely had never talked about withdrawing thousands of dollars from our savings. Do you have the signatures for those withdrawals? I asked. She showed me the receipts. It looked like Arthur's signature, but something about the handwriting seemed off. It was too shaky, too uncertain for his usually firm, clear script. Mrs. Henderson, I asked, my heart pounding in my throat. Did he come alone to make these withdrawals, or was someone with him? She thought for a moment. Now that you mention it, I think he came in with one of your sons once or twice. Julian, I think. He said he was helping his dad with the paperwork because Arthur had trouble reading documents without his glasses. Julian, my son, had been involved in money withdrawals I knew nothing about. He used his father's tired eyes as an excuse. But Arthur could see perfectly well with his glasses, which he never took off during the day. That afternoon, as I looked over the bank receipts again and again, another message arrived on my phone. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Arthur he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. The message confirmed my deepest fear. The evidence was piling up in front of me. The mysteriously increased insurance, the unauthorized money withdrawals, Julian's presence in transactions I knew nothing about. His suspicious efficiency in organizing the funeral, his coldness during his father's final days. But the question that terrified me most was, if they had planned Arthur's death, how had they done it? And who, in the name of all that was good, was sending me these messages? The following days were a nightmare of doubt and suspicion. Every one of Julian's smiles, every one of Marcus's feigned hugs, every word of condolence felt like a mask hiding something sinister. But I needed more proof before I could accept a truth as horrible as the one taking shape in my mind. My phone kept receiving messages from the mysterious number. Go to Arthur's workshop. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see. I decided to go to the workshop for the first time since the accident. Julian had said a machine had exploded. But when I got there, I found something completely different from what I expected. The workshop was strangely clean, too clean to have been the scene of an explosion. There were no burn marks on the walls, no debris, no signs of the destruction that such a serious accident should have caused. Where is the machine that exploded? I asked out loud. I looked all over the shop and found every machine in its place working perfectly. The lathe, the electric saw, the sanding machine, all were intact. What, then, had been the cause of the accident? In Arthur's desk, I found something that sent a chill through me. A note written in his handwriting dated 3 days before his death. Julian insists I need more insurance. He says it's for Eleanor. But something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. Below that note was another. Marcus brought me some papers to sign. He says they're to modernize the shop, but I don't understand what it's about. Why all the hurry? My husband had had suspicions. He had intuited the evil intentions of our sons, but he had died before he could tell me. I kept searching and found an envelope sealed with my name on it. I opened it with trembling hands. It was a letter from Arthur. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. In recent months, I've noticed strange changes in Julian and Marcus. They're too interested in our money, in the insurance, in us selling the house. Serena is putting a lot of pressure on them. Yesterday, Julian told me I should be more concerned about my safety because at my age, any accident could be fatal. I don't know why, but those words sounded like a threat. I love you, Eleanor. If something happens to me, don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons. The letter fell from my hands. Arthur had sensed his own death. He had seen the signs that I, blinded by maternal love, had ignored. That night, Julian came to visit me. He arrived with a bottle of wine and a smile that now seemed completely fake. "Mom, I've been thinking about your future," he said, pouring himself a glass without asking if I wanted one. "The insurance money. It's already in process. It'll be $75,000. How do you know the exact amount?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Well, I helped Dad with the insurance paperwork. He wanted to make sure you had enough money to live comfortably." A lie. Arthur had never wanted to increase the insurance. According to his own note, he had been pressured by Julian. "And what do you think I should do with that money?" I asked, carefully watching his reaction. His eyes lit up with a glint that gave me a chill. "You could buy a smaller, cozier house, or even better, move into a nice retirement community where you'd have company and medical care. Marcus and I could manage your money to make it go further." "Manage my money. We just want to take care of you, Mom." At your age, it's easy to get scammed or make bad financial decisions. We know about investments, about business. We could triple that amount in a few years. Triple my money or make it disappear into their own pockets. "Let me think about it," I said, trying to buy time. "Of course," Serena said with her fake sweetness. "But not too long. For your own good." After they left, I sat in my kitchen, shaking with rage and fear. My own sons, my flesh and blood, had not only murdered their father, but now they were planning to steal everything I had left. That night, my phone vibrated with a longer message than the others. "Tomorrow, go to the police station. Ask for the report on Arthur's accident. There are contradictions you need to know about." The next day, I went to the local police station. Sergeant O'Malley, a kind man who had known Arthur for years, greeted me with a warm smile. "The report on your husband's accident?" he asked, his expression confused. "What accident, Mrs. Vance?" "From his workshop, when the machine exploded." The sergeant checked his files and shook his head. "We don't have any report of an explosion at Arthur's workshop here. In fact, we don't have any report of a work accident involving your husband." The world swayed under my feet. But my son said it was an accident at the workshop. That's why he was in the hospital." "Mrs. Vance, your husband arrived at the hospital on Tuesday morning, but not from a work accident. According to the medical report I have here, he arrived unconscious with symptoms of poisoning. The doctors found trace amounts of a powerful chemical in his system, but they couldn't identify it. They didn't think it was fatal. They just thought it was a random sickness he got from somewhere. And so his death was ultimately ruled to be from a cardiac arrest, a silent heart attack. I felt my world crumble. Poisoning. The word was a hammer blow to my heart. That afternoon, Marcus came home with a bouquet of flowers and the same fake smile as Julian. "How are you, Mom? You look tired." "I'm fine," I lied, observing his every gesture from a new perspective. "I'm just thinking about the future." "That's good. Julian and I have been talking. We think you should sell the house soon while it's fresh on the real estate market." "Why the rush?" "Well, old houses lose value quickly and you need liquidity. Funeral expenses, pending medical bills." More lies. The funeral had been cheap, almost insultingly so, and there were no pending medical bills because the hospital insurance had covered them. "Marcus," I said, looking him directly in the eyes, "you knew your dad didn't die from a work accident." For a fraction of a second, I saw panic in his expression, but he recovered quickly. "What are you talking about, Mom?" I went to the police station. "There's no report of an explosion at your dad's workshop." This time, the panic was more evident. "Mom, you shouldn't be doing things like that. They'll confuse you. The grief is getting to you." "The grief is getting to me, or you've been lying to me." He got up abruptly, spilling the coffee I had poured for him. "I think you need to rest. We'll talk when you're calmer." He left quickly, but not before making a phone call from the porch, although I couldn't hear the words. The tone was urgent, worried. That night, I received the most revealing message yet. "They're coming together tomorrow. They're going to try to convince you that you're crazy, that grief is making you imagine things. Don't believe them, and don't take anything they offer you to eat or drink." The mysterious message's prediction came true exactly as it had warned. The next day, Julian and Marcus arrived together at my house, accompanied by Serena. They had expressions of exaggerated concern and a bag of pastries from the downtown bakery. "Mom, we're so worried about you," Julian began in a sugary voice. "The neighbors have told us you've been acting strange. Beatrice says you've been talking to yourself, that you aren't eating well." Beatrice had never said that. It was just another lie in their growing collection. "Serena brought your favorite pastries," Marcus added, pointing to the bag. "And we made special coffee from that brand you like so much." I remembered the message's words. "Don't take anything they offer you to eat or drink." It was possible that they were planning to poison me too, just as they had Arthur. "Thank you, but I already had breakfast," I said, keeping my distance. "But Mom," Serena insisted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you need to eat properly. You've lost a lot of weight since Dad Arthur died." "I'm fine," I repeated firmly. Julian exchanged a significant look with Marcus. It was the same look they had shared at the hospital when the doctor gave us Arthur's prognosis. "Mom," Julian said, sitting closer to me, "we want to talk to you about something important. Marcus and I have been consulting with some doctors about your recent behavior." "My behavior?" "Yes. The strange questions you've been asking, the visits to the police station, that obsession with irrelevant details about Dad. It's normal after such a great loss, but it can be dangerous if it's not treated." Marcus nodded gravely. "We spoke to Dr. Albright. He says it's common for older people to develop paranoia after losing a partner, especially women your age." "Paranoia?" They were accusing me of being crazy for uncovering their lies. "I am not paranoid," I said with all the firmness I could muster. "I'm just asking questions I should have asked from the beginning." "What questions?" Julian challenged me. "Like why there's no police report for your father's supposed accident. Like why the workshop is perfectly clean if there was an explosion. Like why you withdrew thousands of dollars from our account without telling me anything." The silence that followed was deafening. The three of them exchanged looks of thinly disguised panic. "Mom," Marcus finally said, his voice a strained whisper. "Those things have simple explanations. Dad withdrew that money for a project he wanted to do in secret as a surprise for you." "What surprise?" "He wanted to remodel the house. Julian had hired some workers to fix the roof and paint the walls. He wanted it to be a surprise for your birthday." It was a bold lie, a narrative spun out of thin air. If that were true, where were the workers? Where were the materials? Why did no one in town know about this supposed remodeling? And about the police report, Julian continued, his voice regaining its usual smoothness. "Not all work accidents require a report, especially when they happen on private property." More lies. Sergeant O'Malley had been very clear. Any work accident with serious injuries requires an official report. "Mom?" Serena intervened with a sweet but condescending voice. "We just want to take care of you. That's why we thought it would be best if you moved to a place with specialized medical attention." "A home?" I asked, my voice flat. "A specialized care home," Julian corrected, "for people who are going through complicated grief. They have psychologists, nurses, activities to keep you busy. And in the meantime, Marcus added. We can take care of selling the house, managing the insurance money, all those complicated things you shouldn't have to handle in your current state. There it was, the complete plan. First, they had murdered Arthur for the insurance money, and now they wanted to steal from me, too. And what if I refuse? I asked them. Why would you refuse? Julian asked with a smile that sent a chill through me. We just want what's best for you. Because this is my house. This is where I built my life with Arthur. This is where I raised you. Mom, Marcus said with an exaggerated sigh. You can't live in the past forever. Dad is gone. You have to accept it and move on. I have accepted it, but that doesn't mean I'm going to give away my life and my money. The mask of concern began to crack on my sons' faces. Julian got up abruptly. All right. If you won't listen to reason, we'll have to take more drastic measures. What does that mean? It means we can start a legal process to have you declared mentally incompetent. We have witnesses to your erratic behavior. We have testimony from doctors who confirm you're suffering from senile paranoia. Doctors? What doctors? I hadn't spoken to any doctors about my mental state. Dr. Albright already signed a preliminary report, Marcus added. He says that based on our descriptions of your behavior, it's likely you need specialized care. A doctor who had never examined me had signed a report about my mental state based only on what my sons had told him. How much had it cost them to buy that false evaluation? So you can cooperate voluntarily, Julian continued. Or we can do it legally, but either way, you're going to get the help you need. It was a direct threat. If I didn't hand over my money voluntarily, they would use the legal system to steal it from me. I need time to think about it, I told them, trying to buy time. Of course, Serena said with her false sweetness, but not too much time. For your own good. After they left, I sat in my kitchen, trembling with rage and fear. My own sons, the blood of my blood, had not only murdered their father, but now they were planning to steal everything I had left. That night, my phone vibrated with a message longer than the others. Eleanor, this is Steven Miller, a private investigator. Arthur hired me 3 weeks before he died because he was suspicious of Julian and Marcus. They poisoned him with a chemical mixed in his breakfast tea. I have audio evidence of their conversations, planning everything. Tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon, go to the corner coffee house. Sit at the back table. I'll be there. At last, I would know who had been sending me those messages, and more importantly, I would have the proof I needed to get justice for my husband's death. But I also knew I didn't have much time. Julian and Marcus had shown their hand. If I didn't act fast, I'd end up locked in a home while they spent the money that had cost Arthur his life. The war had begun, and even if I was a 65-year-old woman against 2 ruthless men, I had something they didn't. The truth. And the truth, sooner or later, always finds a way to come out. That night, for the first time since Arthur's death, I felt a strange sense of resolve. I smiled, a bitter, painful curve of my lips, because I knew my husband had not died in vain. His caution, his instinct, his decision to hire a private investigator was going to allow me to get justice. Julian and Marcus had seriously underestimated their mother. They were about to discover that a woman fighting for the memory of her murdered husband is a force more powerful than all their greed combined. The next day arrived, filled with a nervous anticipation that made my stomach churn. I dressed carefully, choosing my most serious dark dress, the one I wore for important occasions. If I was going to meet the man who could give me the answers I needed, I wanted to be prepared for any revelation. At 2:30 in the afternoon, I walked toward the corner coffee house with determined but cautious steps. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every person on the street could be a spy sent by my sons. The paranoia they had accused me of having was starting to feel completely justified. The cafe was moderately full. I went straight to the back table as I had been instructed. I ordered a chamomile tea and waited, my hands trembling slightly on the worn wooden table. Exactly at 3 hours on the dot, a man in his 50s approached my table. He was tall and gray-haired, with intelligent eyes and a serious but kind expression. He was carrying a brown folder under his arm. "Mrs. Vance?" he asked in a low voice. I nodded, not yet trusting my voice. I'm Stephen Miller. I'm so sorry for your loss. Arthur was a good man. He sat down across from me and placed the folder on the table. Before I show you what I have, I need you to know that what you're about to hear and see is going to be very painful. Are you ready? I've been getting ready since I received your first message, I replied with a firmness I didn't know I had. Stephen opened the folder and took out a small voice recorder. Arthur came to see me a month ago. He was worried about his son's behavior. He hired me to investigate them discreetly. He pressed the play button. Arthur's voice, so familiar and dear, filled the small space between us. Stephen, I need you to know that if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Julian and Marcus have been pressuring me to increase my life insurance. Yesterday, Julian brought me papers he said were to better protect Eleanor. But when I read them, I realized there were also clauses that directly benefited them. My heart sped up. Hearing Arthur's voice was like having him back for a few minutes, but his words confirmed my worst suspicions. The recording continued. Marcus has been asking strange questions about my daily routine, what I eat for breakfast, what time I leave the house, if Eleanor comes to the workshop with me. He says it's out of concern, but something about the way he asks worries me. Stephen paused the recording. "Kay, this conversation was 3 weeks before his death, but I have something more recent." He played another recording, this time with Julian's voice in the background talking on the phone. "No, we can't wait any longer. The old man is starting to get suspicious. Yesterday, he asked me why I was so interested in his insurance. Yes, I already have the poison. It works perfectly because the symptoms look like a heart attack or a stroke. No, Mom won't be a problem. After Dad dies, she'll be so devastated that we can do whatever we want with her." Tears began to roll down my cheeks. It was the voice of my son, my own son, coldly planning his father's murder. "There's more," Stephen said softly. "This recording is from the day before Arthur's death." A new recording began. This time it was Marcus talking to someone. "Everything's ready. Tomorrow Julian is going to put the poison in Dad's tea. We told him it was a special vitamin supplement a doctor recommended. The idiot is going to drink it without suspecting a thing. The symptoms? It'll start with dizziness and confusion, then loss of sight, convulsions, coma. The doctors will think it's a stroke or a heart attack. By the time they realize it's poisoning, it'll be too late." My world completely collapsed. Not only had they planned Arthur's murder, but they had executed it with a coldness that terrified me. How was it possible that my sons, the babies I had nursed, the boys I had comforted through their nightmares, were capable of something so monstrous? "How did you get these recordings?" I asked through my sobs. "Arthur had asked me to put listening devices in your house," Stephen explained. "He was afraid, but he didn't know exactly what of. We placed them on the home phone and in some other strategic spots. He took out a series of photographs from the folder. I also have this. Julian buying the poison at a hardware store 30 minutes from town. He paid with cash and used a fake name, but I have it on video. The photographs clearly showed Julian leaving a hardware store with a small bottle in his hands. The date on the photos was 5 days before Arthur's death. And this," Stephen continued, showing me more documents. "These are Julian and Marcus's financial records from the last 6 months. They've been spending a lot more money than their incomes justify. Julian owes $70,000 to a lender in the city. Marcus has gambling debts for $40,000. They were desperate. It all started to make sense. It wasn't just greed that had motivated Arthur's murder. It was financial desperation. My sons were ruined and saw their father as a source of easy, fast money. Why didn't you go to the police immediately after Arthur's death?" I asked him, my voice trembling with a mixture of pain and fury. "Because Julian and Marcus are very smart," Stephen explained. "They bribed the doctor who attended to Arthur at the hospital to change the official diagnosis. Instead of poisoning, the death certificate says heart failure due to complications from a work accident. Without that medical evidence, my recordings might not have been enough for a conviction. But now we have all the evidence together," I said, feeling a mix of pain and determination. "Exactly. And there's one more thing you need to know." My blood ran cold. "What? Your sons were planning to kill you too." Steven played one last recording, this time with Julian and Marcus's voices together. "Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too," Julian said. "We can't risk her getting suspicious or anyone else putting ideas in her head." "How?" Marcus asked. "The same as with Dad, but this time we can make it look like a suicide from depression. A widow who can't live without her husband. Nobody would question it, and we're her only heirs. Everything would be ours. The house, the savings, the insurance money, almost $200,000 in total." The recording stopped. I was shaking uncontrollably. My sons had not only murdered their father, but they were planning to murder me as well. "All for money." "Mrs. Vance," Steven said gently, "I know this is devastating, but we have enough evidence to make them pay for what they did." "What do we do now?" I asked, wiping my tears. "First, we need to go to the police with all this evidence. Sergeant O'Malley is an honest man. He's not involved in the corruption. Second, we need to act fast. Your sons are planning to have you declared mentally incompetent tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "Yes, I intercepted a phone conversation this morning. They're meeting with Judge Miller at 10 more in the morning to start the mental incapacitation process." I got up from the table with a determination I hadn't felt in weeks. "Then we have to act tonight." "Exactly," Steven confirmed. "But first, there's one more thing I want to show you." He took one last photograph from the folder. In it, Arthur was leaving a medical clinic I didn't recognize. 3 days before he died, your husband went to get a full medical exam at a clinic in the city. The results show that he was perfectly healthy. There were no signs of heart disease. His blood pressure was normal. Everything was perfect. This definitively proves that his death was caused by poisoning, not by natural health problems. That was the final piece of evidence we needed. Arthur had been a healthy man, murdered by his own sons. "Steven," I said, taking his hand, "thank you for keeping your promise to my husband. Now, let's get justice." That same night, Steven and I went directly to the police station. Sergeant O'Malley was working the night shift that week, which was perfect for our purposes. When we arrived, it was 8:02 in the evening, and the station was relatively quiet. "Sergeant O'Malley," I said in a firm voice, "I need to file a formal complaint for the murder of my husband, Arthur." The sergeant looked at me with surprise. "Murder, Mrs. Vance?" "The death certificate says he died from heart complications after a work accident." "The death certificate is false," I replied, placing Steven's folder on his desk. "My husband was deliberately poisoned by our own sons." For the next 2 hours, Steven and I presented all the evidence. The audio recordings, the photographs of Julian buying the poison, the bank documents showing the unauthorized withdrawals, Arthur's medical results proving his perfect health, and finally, the recorded conversations where my sons confessed to both their father's murder and their plans to kill me. Sergeant O'Malley listened to each recording with an increasingly serious expression. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head in disbelief. This is monstrous," he murmured. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Mrs. Vance? Once we arrest your sons, there's no turning back." "Sergeant," I replied with all the dignity I could muster, "those men murdered my husband in cold blood for money. They were planning to murder me, too. They are no longer my sons. They are criminals who must pay for their crimes." "We'll need the medical examiner to exhume Arthur's body to confirm the presence of the poison," the sergeant explained. "Are you prepared for that?" "Do whatever is necessary," I replied without hesitation. Sergeant O'Malley immediately called the district attorney. Despite the late hour, the seriousness of the case led the DA to come to the station personally. After reviewing all the evidence, he immediately authorized arrest warrants for Julian and Marcus. "We'll proceed at dawn," the DA explained to us. "We need to make sure we have all the evidence before they can destroy any additional proof." Steven walked me home that night. "Are you sure you'll be okay alone?" he asked with concern. "I'll be fine," I replied. "After everything I've discovered, I'm no longer afraid. I have justice on my side. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed up, sitting in the kitchen, looking at the photographs of Arthur we had on the walls. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel only pain. I felt a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction, knowing that justice for his murder was coming soon. At 6 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Julian. "Mom, you need to come to Marcus's house right away. Something terrible has happened." "What happened?" I asked, feigning concern. "It's better if I explain it in person. Please come quickly." I knew it was a trap. After hearing the recordings the night before, I knew they were planning to move up their plans to get rid of me. But I also knew the police were already on their way to arrest them. "I'm on my way," I lied. Instead of going to Marcus's house, I stayed in my kitchen waiting. At 7:30 in the morning, I saw from my window as several police cars headed toward my son's houses in different directions. My phone rang repeatedly for the next hour. First Julian, then Marcus, both with increasingly desperate voices asking where I was, but I didn't answer any calls. At 9:00 in the morning, Sergeant O'Malley knocked on my door. "Mrs. Vance, we've arrested Julian and Marcus. They are in police custody, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder." I felt my legs tremble, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from relief. How did they react? I asked. Julian denied everything at first, but when we played the recordings for him, he collapsed. Marcus tried to escape through the back window of his house. We had to chase him for 6 blocks. That afternoon, Serena came to see me. She arrived sobbing, pleading, completely different from the cold, calculating woman I had known. "Mrs. Vance, please, you have to drop the charges against Julian. He's not bad. He was just desperate because of his debts. This is my fault, too. I pressured him a lot to find money." I looked at her without a trace of compassion. "Serena, your husband poisoned my husband. He was planning to murder me, too. There is no explanation or justification for that. But we're family," she screamed in desperation. "Think about what this is going to do to the family." "The family died the day you decided to kill Arthur for money," I replied coldly. "Now please leave my house." 3 days later, the exhumation of Arthur's body was carried out. The lab results confirmed exactly what Steven had discovered: lethal levels of the poison in his system, enough to cause all the symptoms he had experienced before his death. The case became a sensation throughout the town. No one could believe that 2 sons had murdered their own father for money. The local newspapers called it the cruelest crime of the decade. Over the following weeks, more details came to light during the investigation. Julian really owed $70,000 to illegal lenders who had started threatening him with violence. Marcus had lost $40,000 in underground gambling dens and was also facing threats. They had seen Arthur's life insurance money as their only salvation. But their greed had led them to increase the policies so dramatically that it had aroused their own father's suspicion. We also discovered that the doctor who had falsified the death certificate had received $5,000 in cash from Julian. He was also arrested for obstructing justice and falsifying official documents. Steven explained all the details of the plan Arthur had made with him. "Your husband was smarter than his sons believed. He knew something bad was coming, but he didn't know exactly what. He hired me not only to investigate Julian and Marcus, but also to protect you if something happened to him." "Did he know they were going to kill him?" I asked. "Not exactly," Steven said, "but he suspected his life was in danger. That's why we installed the recording devices. That's why we documented everything. He wanted to make sure that if something happened to him, the truth would come to light. My Arthur, even in his final days, had been protecting me. He had anticipated our son's betrayal and had taken steps to ensure that justice would prevail." The trial was scheduled to begin in 2 months. Both Julian and Marcus faced charges of first-degree murder, which in our state carried a sentence of 25 years to life. The day of the trial arrived after months of intense legal preparation. The courtroom was completely full. Reporters from several regional newspapers had come to cover what was already known as the case of the killer sons. The whole town was there: neighbors, former co-workers of Arthur's, even people I barely knew but who wanted to witness this historic moment of justice. I wore my best black dress, the same one I had worn for our wedding so many years ago, but which now represented mourning and dignity. Steven accompanied me, sitting by my side throughout the entire process. His presence gave me the strength to face what would be the most difficult day of my life. Julian and Marcus entered the courtroom in handcuffs, dressed in orange prison jumpsuits. Seeing my sons like that broke my heart one more time, but I no longer felt pity for them. I only felt a deep sadness for the moral death they had chosen long before they physically murdered their father. The prosecutor presented the case with devastating precision. One by one, the recordings were played for the court. The silence was absolute every time the voices of Julian and Marcus were heard, coldly planning Arthur's murder. When the prosecutor played the recording where they planned to kill me too, several people in the audience gasped in horror. One elderly woman got up and left the courtroom crying. I couldn't blame her. It was difficult to process such cruelty. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor said during his opening statement, "this is not an ordinary case of family greed. This is a case of cold and calculated premeditation where two men decided to murder the father who had raised them with love and sacrifice simply because they needed money to pay off their gambling debts and irresponsible loans." Julian and Marcus's lawyers tried to present a defense based on desperate circumstances and external influences, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings didn't lie. The bank documents didn't lie. The forensic evidence of the poison in Arthur's body didn't lie. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with trembling legs, but a clear mind. I had been waiting for this moment for months. "Mrs. Vance," the prosecutor asked me, "can you tell us what your relationship was like with your sons before your husband's murder?" "I thought I had a good relationship with them," I replied, looking directly at Julian and Marcus. "I raised them with love. I sacrificed everything for their well-being. Their father worked from sun up to sundown to give them the best we could. I never imagined that love and sacrifice would become the reason for his murder." "At any point, did you suspect they could harm your husband?" "No, that is the most painful part of all this. I trusted them completely. When they told me Arthur had an accident at his workshop, I believed them. When they organized the funeral so quickly, I thought they were being efficient in their grief. I never imagined they were covering up a murder." Julian lowered his head during my testimony. Marcus looked at me defiantly, but I saw tears in his eyes. Too late for tears. Too late for regret. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when the prosecutor decided to play the full recording of the conversation where they planned my own murder. Julian's voice filled the courtroom. "Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too. We can't risk her getting suspicious." A murmur of horror swept through the audience. Several people turned to look at me with expressions of disbelief and compassion. "How did you feel when you heard this recording for the first time?" the prosecutor asked me. "I realized that I had lost my two sons long before I lost my husband," I replied, my voice cracking but firm. "The babies I nursed, the children I comforted in their nightmares, had died and been replaced by two strangers capable of any cruelty for money." The defense tried to cross-examine me, suggesting that maybe I had misinterpreted my son's intentions, that maybe the grief had made me exaggerate the evidence. But the recordings spoke for themselves. Steven also testified, explaining in detail how Arthur had hired him because he was afraid of his own sons. He described every step of the investigation, every piece of evidence collected, every recorded moment that revealed the truth. The medical examiner presented the results of the exhumation, confirming the lethal presence of the poison in Arthur's body. He explained how this poison acts slowly, causing exactly the symptoms my husband had experienced before he died. After 3 days of devastating testimony, the closing arguments arrived. The prosecutor was crushing. Julian and Marcus are not victims of circumstances. They are predators who saw their own parents as financial obstacles that had to be eliminated. They planned, executed, and covered up Arthur's murder, and were planning to do the same to Eleanor. They don't deserve compassion. They deserve justice. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. I could hear the beating of my own heart as the judge read the verdict. In the case of the state versus Julian Vance and Marcus Vance on the charge of first-degree murder of Arthur Vance, we find the defendants guilty. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and exclamations. Julian collapsed in his chair, finally comprehending the magnitude of what he had done. Marcus remained rigid, staring straight ahead with no expression. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against Eleanor Vance, we find the defendants guilty. The judge proceeded immediately to the sentencing. Julian Vance and Marcus Vance, for the premeditated murder of your father and the conspiracy to murder your mother, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 30 years. When I heard those words, I felt a gigantic weight lift from my shoulders. Justice. Finally, there was justice for Arthur. After the trial, many people came up to hug me and express their support. Beatrice cried with me not from sadness but from relief. "Eleanor, Arthur can rest in peace now," she whispered to me. That night, I returned to my house, which now felt different. It was no longer a place of pain and betrayal. It was my home again, the place where Arthur and I had been happy for 42 years. Steven came to visit me a week after the trial. "How do you feel?" he asked me. "At peace," I answered honestly. "For the first time since Arthur's death, I sleep soundly. I know he is resting because his death did not go unpunished. And the money, the insurance, the savings, I donated the life insurance money to a foundation for victims of family crimes," I explained. "That money was stained with blood. I could never have used it. My personal savings are enough to live modestly for the rest of my days." 6 months after the trial, I received a letter in prison mail. It was from Julian. "Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I regret everything. The money, the debts, the desperation, they blinded us. We lost all humanity. Marcus and I destroyed the most loving family in the world for money that we didn't even get to enjoy. Tomorrow I will commit suicide in my cell. I can't live with what we did. Take care, Mom. Tell Dad we're sorry we were such bad sons." I didn't arrive in time to prevent his suicide. Julian was found hanging in his cell the next day. Marcus, upon learning of his brother's death, suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was transferred to the prison psychiatric hospital. Today, 2 years after the trial, I live peacefully in my small house. I have converted Arthur's workshop into a garden where I grow flowers to take to his grave every Sunday. Steven has become a close friend, visiting me regularly to make sure I'm okay. Sometimes the neighbors ask me if I miss my sons. The answer is complicated. I miss the children they were, but those children died long before Arthur did. They were replaced by strangers, monsters I couldn't recognize, and they left a trail of emotional devastation that I am still trying to heal from. But I have found a sense of closure. The love Arthur and I shared was real, and it was strong enough to survive even the darkest betrayal. It was that love that gave me the strength to fight for justice, to face the very people I had raised, and to ensure that my husband's memory was not tarnished by the crimes of his sons. This story, dear friends, is a chilling reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that the greatest betrayal can come from the most trusted sources. It's a call to look beyond the surface, to question what doesn't feel right, and to never let love blind you to the truth. Because sometimes, the people who are meant to protect you are the ones you need to be protected from. If my story has touched you, please give this video a like and share it with those you love. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel so we can continue to explore the most profound and mysterious stories of humanity together. Thank you for listening.